I am extremely pleased to introduce Bishop Irenei of London and Western Europe. Just as a bit of background, I had the pleasure of hearing Bishop Irenei's sermons on a regular basis when he was a priest serving at the St. Tikhon of Zadonsk Parish in San Francisco. This is where St. John established the orphanage and the location that served as his primary residence after leaving China. If you've never heard him speak, you're in for a treat. I think after hearing him, you will agree that he has a powerful way with words and a very calm demeanor. Bishop Irenei.
I'm very happy to be with you digitally. I will try my best to say something that's inspiring, though this is not a medium that I'm very familiar or comfortable with. But I thought at Jonas's urging that I might just talk a little bit for a few minutes about St. John, whom I love very much, and particularly his legacy here. And then I want to talk about something that we've begun doing in memory of him and in his name here in London that we would love to receive support from if it's something that people feel like supporting. So Jonas, you said you've given me about 10 minutes. I've never said anything in only 10 minutes, so you might have to forcefully stop me when the time comes, please. But may God bless us. So Jonas mentioned the year 1951 as the year that this fund was established. That's the same year that Vladika John was appointed as the Archbishop of Brussels and Western Europe. And I point this out because to many people living in the United States in particular, St. John seems to have almost been transplanted from Shanghai to San Francisco. These are the two poles of his story that people seem to know about. But there was a not insignificant period in between. In fact, 11 years he was the ruling bishop here of Western Europe and the British Isles. Which is second only to his time in Shanghai. He was in Shanghai for 14 and a half years before they were commanded to leave in 1949. There was a small period where he was looking for a place to establish a priut, an orphanage in America. First attempt was Washington, D.C., but as we all know, it was successfully established in San Francisco. And I'm so delighted to see so many of the St. Tikhon's people here, especially Peter and Lydia, who are there, whom I haven't seen in a very long time. And it's a delight to see you now. But from 1951 until 1962, St. John was the bishop here. And so he's known locally. You know, every place knows him differently. In San Francisco, everyone calls him St. John of San Francisco. In Shanghai, presumably he was known by that title. Here he's still known as St. John of Brussels, the Archbishop of Brussels, and he's often commemorated as such in the services. He was a pastor here in the same manner and in the same style and with the same power as he was a pastor in these other places, with the same impact on people that transformed their lives in other parts of the world. And for here, the people here cling to him as our bishop, right? He is the bishop of this place. And just as in St. Tikhon's priut in San Francisco, I remember Lydia was the one who said to me, Lydia was here with us, when I was first appointed there as a priest, and I wanted to do something, I have no idea anymore what it was. Lydia said to me, well, make sure to ask Vladika's blessing. And I presumed she meant Vladika Feodosi, who lived upstairs. But of course, she was referring to St. John simply as Vladika, the way you know him, the way you knew him in life, the way you know him still. And in the same way, here, people have a very personal connection to him. The places where he lived are cherished, the places where he served are honored, and the things that he did. The sisterhood of my cathedral in London, for example, has its own ustav, its own set of statutes that St. John wrote. Those of you who know St. John's personality know that he was a very precise individual. He was very educated and he had a lawyer's mind. He wrote so many ukazi, so many decrees every year that it's hard to keep track of them. I write about 40 or 50 decrees in a given year. St. John often wrote 300 or 400 in a year. And when he saw that a sisterhood needed to be organized, he organized it. And we still have hanging on the wall the statutes that govern the role of the sisters in the cathedral here. He also came to establish one of the buildings, to consecrate one of the buildings. The parish in London is nearly 330 years old, but in that time, it's had to move buildings on several occasions. And when St. John was the bishop, he came and consecrated the former cathedral, which is no longer standing. We've erected a new one, which we hope will now be permanent and is always ours. But St. John lived his life here very much in the same vein as everywhere else. He arrived having had all that he had known in Shanghai stripped away from him. This was the second time in his life this had happened. And he had grown up in pre-revolutionary Russia, and he saw the whole world collapse around him. But he went on and was educated in foreign lands, in the strange world outside of the borders. And then he was sent into an even stranger world, into the colonies in Asia, where he took up his missionary works there with such zeal. And then that was taken away from him, right? And the story of how he had to leave Shanghai is dramatic and awe-inspiring. But after a period when he thought perhaps he would be able to return to his beloved land, when clearly that was not going to be possible, even though he was still signing his letters as Bishop of the Chinese mission, even for several years after he left Shanghai, the Synod said, we need to appoint you to govern the flock in Europe. And he arrived at a time when the church here was in disarray. There had been a schism in 1926 where the diaspora had split apart, and some of them remained faithful to the church abroad, and some went into the jurisdiction ultimately of Constantinople and created a kind of parallel jurisdiction. And for many, many generations, these two parts of the Russian diaspora did not get along at all. And St. John arrived into Paris. He was appointed originally as the Archbishop of Paris, but all of our churches were gone. And the only church that was still available in Paris was a tiny little parish dedicated to the resurrection in Meudon. And so that's where St. John arrived. Bishop Leonti, who was a young but very saintly bishop who died after only 6 years in office and was succeeded by his brother, came to greet St. John personally as he arrived in Europe. And they couldn't even hold the service in the church. There were too many people, and the church is very small. It's still there in Meudon. So they used a Protestant church nearby where they could hold a full vigil and hierarchical service. And there was no cathedral for the reigning bishop to serve in, so he located ultimately a little garage on the side of a street. It was a 2-car garage, and I mean tiny. And he converted one section of the garage into the Church of all the New Martyrs of Russia, and the other side of the garage he turned into the headquarters for the diocese. And so this great miracle-working saint, who was acknowledged as a saint even by non-Orthodox people in Europe at the time. There was a famous Roman Catholic bishop in Paris who is known to have remarked, if you want to see an example of real sanctity, go and find the little John who walks the streets at night. So even that tradition that he maintained in San Francisco of walking along the streets, blessing people, was known in Paris at the time. The little kелья where he lived is not so different from the kелья in St. Tikhon's house, is still there. The house, unfortunately, does not belong to the church, but it's still very close to the parish and still standing, and one can go and visit the place where the St. John lived. And he undertook extraordinary missionary and pastoral works here. There is a wonderful example of a little podvoria, a little monastic community, tiny, of only 2 inhabitants in London. And St. John visited in London on one occasion and visited the little place, and there were very humble monastics inside who didn't like to ask for money. and he knew that they wouldn't ask him for money, and he knew that they wouldn't accept any money if he tried to give it to them. So he asked for a cup of tea, and while they went away to produce the tea, he started looking through the books in their library. And later, after months after the visit had ended, they recounted that every time they opened up a book for weeks afterwards, money would fall out of it, and they had no idea where it had come from. But in this little way, St. John, like St. Nicholas, so many centuries before, throwing money through the window because he knew the father of the young girls wouldn't accept it, St. John was doing very similar things here in this diocese. And he also roamed the whole diocese. St. John had a very small diocese in Shanghai geographically, but when he got to Europe, he had the whole continent, as I have now, 11 countries in this diocese today, and it was roughly the same in his day. And he visited everywhere, and he was dedicated to bringing the Orthodox faith to the local people. He was fiercely traditional, fiercely loyal to the church abroad, to the Holy Synod, to the customs of the church, but he was also deeply pastoral in his ministry to the people. He himself established all of the parishes in the Netherlands. Some of them have not survived, some of them disappeared over the years, some of them are now in the Moscow Patriarchate, but we still have two that were founded by St. John. I just came back from celebrating the altar feast in Arnhem. Some of you may know this from the very famous World War II Battle of Arnhem. And there we have a church that St. John founded and established, and which went into schism and was in schism, Raskol, for nearly 25 years. And one of the happinesses that I've had as bishop here is that in my third or fourth year here, the parish returned to the church abroad after so many years in schism. And once more, one of the first things that we did is I urged them to get an icon of St. John, and there's a beautiful icon of him that now hangs on the iconostasis. He founded them, and I'm sure that it's by his prayers that they have been brought back into the church and into the fullness of Orthodox life. So there are little stories of St. John everywhere here, and many, many people here who know him. There's a wonderful concentration of his orphans, as they were. I've never really liked calling you his orphans. You weren't really orphans. You had the greatest father imaginable in St. John. But we have some here as well. We have a wonderful woman called Olga Panteleymovna, who is also with you in Shanghai, who is a parishioner here in our London cathedral. And just like you, she has a very direct and personal relationship with St. John, even today. And I have to say, on a personal level, one of the abiding gifts that I received from spending 7 years in St. Tikhon's, in the Priut in San Francisco, was developing to a small degree that same kind of relationship with Vladika. I've always loved St. John. I've known about him my whole Orthodox life, but it was living there in a place where he was not just some great mythic figure that one learned about off the pages, but where he was someone that you lived with and talked to, and still spoke to and speak to, in the reality that he is still there and still listening. That was a treat for me to experience and has shaped my own veneration of him. Here we are starting from this coming year to make St. John's Feast in London a big British celebration. That is to say, to start inviting hierarchs and clergy from all of the other Orthodox jurisdictions to come and join us in the cathedral on St. John's Summer Feast Day, the same one that's celebrated as his main feast in San Francisco, and to use this as an occasion to bring so many people together in his honor, to venerate him and to receive the blessings of his guidance. So, mindful of time, I'm going to stop with my meandering reflections there, though you can tell me to do more of them if you wish. But I do want to share something that we started just under 2 years ago in memory of St. John. And one of the things that really inspires me about this is that I had nothing to do with it. Um, I was asked for a blessing, which I gave with both hands, as they say, with my full support. But this was started by parishioners who came and said, "We are the spiritual children of St. John who cared for the poor and the hungry." And we realize that here, it's the poor and hungry are not just in far-flung parts of the earth. We realize there are huge numbers of them right here in London. This was just as the war was beginning. And I know one of the big differences between the experience of the war here and in the United States is we have had thousands upon thousands of refugees coming into this diocese. I've set up 3 parishes in the last year that are specifically for Ukrainian refugees in places where we didn't have parishes before, but suddenly there was such a population of Ukrainian refugees that we felt we had to set up a church so that they could worship and maintain their life of faith. And even here in London, we've had tens of thousands of refugees from the war. And their circumstances have been very difficult. For a while, the government was supporting them. And then, of course, like all things with governments, that tended to just drizzle away into nothing. And so it was the parishioners who came and said, "We feel that we must do what St. John would have done and help these people." And I blessed them, and they organized entirely of themselves a food bank that's operated out of the cathedral, which was in its inception designed for refugees and their families who arrived here and were in the cost of living crisis, as they call it here in Europe. The cost of food is extremely high for everyone, but it's all the more compounded for refugees who have no income, who are living on state benefits and so on. But when we started this, the only input that I had was to say, we absolutely should start this. However, it should be for anyone who comes, not just for refugees. But St. John would never have said no to anybody. So whatever the motive might have been to start it, anyone who comes, give. And the philosophy that they adopted, the organizers of our food bank at the cathedral, was they never ask anyone. If someone comes and asks for help, they give it. They don't ask for any explanation. They don't provide any tests to qualify. If you come and show up and say you need help, you get it. What the food bank does is it organizes food boxes, and each food box is enough in principle to feed a family for 2 weeks, for a fortnight. So the food bank operates fortnightly, every other weekend. They come together. They're a team of more than 20 volunteers, and rather like the Benevolent Fund, no one is paid, and they receive no money. The parish itself has never paid a single penny because they have managed to do everything by donations. Now that's changed recently. The parish gave a grant because the parish said, how can we not be supporting something happening in our name? But I raise that to show how much can be done just by initiative and through volunteers without any source of funding at all, just by good-willed people doing good things. And here is the food bank on a Saturday. All throughout the week, shipments of food come, and the organizers have worked with local businesses, local charities to provide food. And on Saturdays, the volunteers meet in the hall. This is the parish hall. And they organize all of this food. We get 100-kilo sacks of flour, and it has to be subdivided into smaller bags. We get 500 kilos of beans, and it has to be subdivided. And so the volunteers come in on a Saturday, and they organize all of this into these boxes. And the boxes are in different sizes, depending on the size of the family that they're going to support. Over the course of the last 2 years, many people are repeat users of the food bank, and so we try to get to know who they are and what their needs are. Some of them have specific dietary restrictions, and so we try as much as we can to cater to it. They got very excited and had these aprons made that says the Cathedral Food Bank on it. But one of the joys, as you can see in this photograph, is that these are all young people. Two of them are very young people, but everyone here, with the exception of the husband and wife standing right in the middle, everyone else here is a new member to the parish who started participating in parish life through the food bank. So they saw what was happening, they wanted to get involved, and it's through that that they started to learn about the parish life, about the church. And indeed, we've had several families, particularly refugee families, who found out about the food bank and came having never dreamt of coming to the church at all. But we're a little sneaky. When we give out the food, we never have any conditions, but we certainly say, well, why don't you stick around a little bit and come to the liturgy and then have a meal with us afterwards. So again, you can see the great number of young people who are here who help each week with this. So I share this with you. I hope it's inspiring to you. It certainly has been to me. And in little ways like this, the people are eager to carry on the legacy of St. John, to not just live out our orthodoxy in terms of our liturgical life, in terms of our prayer, in terms of the sanctity of our family life, and so on, but also to make sure that we are actively caring for our brothers and sisters and for those who are in need. This is one little project, but one that I hope is doing some good in the world in memory of Vladika.